Okay, sorry you can't see me terribly well, but the chair I usually sit on is broken. And this one's a lot shorter. Anyways, Ultimate Fight Night. I think this is 15 members or something, right? Yes. It is coming up next Wednesday, so in about 8 days. And it's time to do my picks for it. Should have probably done this earlier, but school just started. We're in the second week of it, and it's kept me a little busy, not so much with schoolwork, but with books and getting my schedule sorted out. And nothing like entering a new program by direct entry to get you busy. Alright, anyways, we start off with Wilson Govea versus Ryan Jensen. I'm assuming this is a 185-pound fight because Ryan Jensen's 185 and I can't see him going up to 205. Which begs the question, is Wilson Govea actually going to have cardio going down to 185 when it forces him to train? I don't think we'll see it in this fight just because I think his stand-up is that much better than Ryan Jensen's. I think his grappling is that much better than Ryan Jensen's. I think he finishes this in the first round. I'm going with TKO, but it could be a submission as well. Next up, we have another guy who's changing weight classes, Brad Morris, coming down from the heavyweight to 205 to face Jason Brills. I'm going to pick Brad Morris by unanimous decision. He's not much of a finisher. I don't see him being dominant enough to finish Jason Brills from topside with strikes. That being said, a little disclaimer here, not that, not that if this comes true I don't get a loss, but we'll see. We saw with Jason Lambert, the weight cut didn't exactly help him, and maybe we'll see the same thing with Brad Morris. I don't know. Same thing with Wilson Govea. I think actually will be benefited by the weight cut, because honestly I think that man doesn't train that hard, and that's why he gasses. Next up, Alessio Sakara versus Joe Vedipo. Joe Vedipo is an okay fighter. He could beat Alessio Sakara if Sakara fights terribly, i.e. like he fought against Houston Alexander and like he fought against Chris Lehman to a lesser extent and countless other opponents, because I swear if the Alessio Sakara that kicked the ever-living crap out of Victor Valimaki shows up, the man is a guy who actually is a man to watch. Problem is, that guy doesn't show up much. So I'm going to take Legionarius by stoppage due to strikes in the second round, though. Next up, Rob Kimmins, Dan Miller. I like this fight. I'm going with Rob Kimmins by judge's decision, even though you'd think Dan Miller would actually be the guy to win a decision in this fight, because I think Dan Miller is a slightly stronger wrestler than Rob Kimmins. But I see Kimmins being a better grappler and Dan Miller just, fending him off a little bit more than, most guys make Dan Miller work for. So I'm giving it to Rob Kimmins by UD, but I could see this being a fight that goes to unanimous decision, goes to Dan Miller, because UFC judges love to score things in favor of the guy on top position, even if he didn't necessarily win the fight. But anyways. Drew McFedry's Mike Macienzio. Taking Drew McFedry's by TKO in the first because Macienzio, his striking defense really doesn't impress me. If he can get Drew McFedry's down, I could see him submitting Drew McFedry's, because Drew McFedry's ground game is not up to par, really. But Drew hits like a truck, and I don't see Macienzio lasting terribly long if he can't get a quick takedown. Next, Alan Belcher, Ed Shortfuse Herman. I've been going back and forth in this fight because I think if Alan Belcher shows up like he can, like he has for some fights, he can be a good Ed Herman. The problem is a bad Ed Herman can beat a bad Alan Belcher. That's how, badly Alan Belcher's skills go down. Ed Herman is a guy who also loses a lot. He seems to be very different fights, but Alan Belcher's the type of guy that he should probably have something for. I think if Belcher's takedown defense is not on point, Herman can take him down. I don't think he can submit him, although then again I didn't think Kendall Grove could submit Alan Belcher either. But I'm not going to take a submission. I'm going to say Herman has to wear him down to the third round and then finishes him with strikes. And just because I picked against him, watch a great Alan Belcher show up. Next up, we have Joe Lozon versus Kyle Bradley, who lost to Chris Lytle in his UFC debut, if you do not remember that, in fairly spectacular fashion. Taking Jay Lau by a tap out in the second round. I don't know why I'm picking tap out, really. In fact, I'm going to change that to TKO right now. So, TKO. Next, Eric Ravishing Red Schaefer and Houston Alexander. This fight's not leaving the first round. Either Eric Ravishing Red Schaefer will get his face pounded in by Houston Alexander because he does not like getting hit, and that is if he can't take him down. If he can take him down, Houston Alexander has no ground game. Schaefer, for all his flaws as a fighter, fairly decent on the ground. Schaefer, I'm going to take Schaefer by tap out in the first round, but would not be surprised to see Houston Alexander completely break Eric Schaefer's face. Nate Diaz versus Josh Neer. Taking Nate Diaz by judge's decision. My reasoning for this is it took Nick Diaz a really long time to try and submit Josh Neer. And Nick is, of course, bigger, and although it seems that Nate might actually be the better grappler, I think it's just that he's actually fighting kind of in his weight class, whereas I think Nick at 170 always fought above his weight class. So I'm going to take him by UD. Although it's weird to pick against Josh Neer in terms of a decision, because Josh Neer is the bigger, stronger, and theoretically better wrestler. That being said, I'm again giving some faith to the UFC judges that if Nate Diaz throws up a bunch of submissions, keeps him working and everything, they'll give it to him. That might be, again, a bit of a stretch. And the main event, we have Clay the Carpenter Guida versus Mac Danzig. Okay. Logic says I take Guida because he's a strong wrestler, and in the past, Danzig has had a hard time with wrestlers who are good and can defend submissions. This, of course, doesn't count Tommy Spear, who he beat. Tommy was very, very raw, but like a refined wrestler, like Cliff French, for example, generally beats Mac Danzig. That being said, Guida is slightly prone to submissions. We don't like... It's not something that people generally look at, but if you pull up his Fight Finder, he has lost by submission on 5 occasions, including to not great submission artists like Roger Huerta and Tristan Younger, I guess, is a fairly solid submission artist. But my theory is, if Tristan Younger can submit you, I think Mac Danzig also can. And he has no slow-mo button in him, and I think that actually hurts him at times because he's going to keep pressing the pace, even though I think he actually wins the first 2 rounds. But Danzig's going to punish him on the feet, punish him with strikes. Guida's terrible on the feet. Terrible, honest. By UFC standards, I mean he is terrible. On the amateur, in the middle of nowhere show, he would be probably fairly solid. But by UFC standards, he is not a good striker. Mac Danzig's a pretty good striker. Mac Danzig's a pretty good counter wrestler. And Mac Danzig has some very nice submissions. So I'm taking Danzig via the sub in the 3rd round. When Guida keeps the aggression up, Danzig gets a little bit more desperate, and I think that's when the submission comes. So anyways, agree with him, disagree with him, whatever. There are a couple of really close fights that, I've kind of highlighted how they can go a very different way. I don't know if any of my picks, aside from possibly Danzig, would be considered a real gamble pick. But there's a lot of fights here that are kind of 50-50. And, yeah, that's kind of how I see it. So I'm expecting maybe a bad record. Anyways, I'm off.